Games consist of at least two elements, theme and mechanics. Theme is the story or world of the game, often referred to as flavor. Mechanics are the actions, interactions, and relationships in games, including things such as space, time, chance, skill, and the mathematics of scoring, rolling dice, odds of 7, etc. Some games emphasize theme, while others, like chess, are almost entirely about mechanics. Rain strikes an almost perfect balance between theme and mechanics, creating an immersive, challenging, and most importantly, fun experience. Designed by Garage Games with art by Starcat Games, Rain is a card game of medieval warfare set in the fictional kingdom of Kazath. The king is dead, and a war for succession has begun. Players take on the roles of Lords of Kazath, plotting and fighting alongside and against the other players to earn legitimacy and win the Onyx Crown, to be declared Ruler of Kazath. Players begin with 7 cards, 5 military and 2 event cards. They will then use these cards as well as their skills at building alliances to take control of the Onyx Crown, becoming regent, and gaining the special abilities and responsibilities that role confers. The game ends when one player has at least 9 legitimacy points and control of the Onyx Crown. Gameplay is divided into 4 distinct phases: influence, plotting, combat, and the regent phase. There is no regent in the first round, so the first player will need to be determined randomly. In terms of mechanics, this is where players discard some of their cards in the hopes of making their remaining cards more valuable. In terms of theme, this is where the Lords of Kazath demonstrate their support for the great houses, securing the support they need to make a claim. In order to earn the backing of these powerful houses, the Lords of Kazath must bid for their influence. Starting with the first player, each player places their bid face down in front of them. Players can bid any number of military units as long as they all belong to the same house. In subsequent rounds, players may bid on houses controlled by other players. Certain event cards can also be played at this time instead of military units. Once all players have bid, the cards are revealed, and the players that bid the highest force for a given house takes control. During this influence phase, the total force is determined only by the number on the bottom of the card. For example, Bear Cavalry is worth 5. Sellswords worth 2. After the force is resolved, house cards featuring the house sigils are distributed to any player who won the bid for that house. The effects of any event card come now into play. Finally, all cards played are discarded. Lords of Kazath need the backing of one of the great houses of Kazath in order to earn legitimacy points. Each great house has an army of 15 units of various strengths, represented by cards with force points. Each house has 3 units each of peasants, worth 1 force, militia, worth 2, archers, worth 3, soldiers, worth 4, and knights, worth 5 force. In addition to its own unique house sigil, each house has a modified unit that confers unique abilities to the army it is fighting for. While one house's elite unit only has a force of 1, and another's has a force of 5, the different uses of the cards in the influence and combat phases balance out these differences, and an effective strategy can exploit the benefits of their house and the weaknesses of their opponents. House Evergreen sigil features a giant tree and winding ivy. Evergreen peasants are called treetop skirmishers, and they gain +2 to their base force of 1 if an event card has been played in combat. House Golden Stag sigil features What Else? A golden stag with dripping antlers. Golden Stag militia units are sellswords, who confer a bonus of +2 if in an army controlled by House Golden Stag, and +1 if fighting for another house. House Lightbringer is represented by a screaming red phoenix, and its firebow archer units fire flaming arrows and are returned to the player's hand instead of being discarded after combat. House Hammerfast's Grey Sigil features 2 gauntlets wielding a warhammer, and their soldier units are called Hammer Hands. Hammer hands wear visors with no eye openings, swinging their massive hammers to destroy their opponents. They are even more deadly in number, each unit gaining +3 to force for each other hammer hand in the army. Finally, House Frostreave is represented by a scarred, roaring polar bear on a blue background. Its elite bear cavalry units are the single most powerful military units in the game, earning a +5 force bonus if no other bear cavalry units are in their army. A player must have the backing of a great house in order to take control of the Onyx Crown, so the winning strategy here is to play the highest amount of force you can to ensure the backing of a house, right? Not so fast. You're going to need some of those units in the combat phase. But before we get there, we need to develop our strategy and recruit some allies. The plotting phase is when players make alliances with one another, scheming to get other players to support them by giving them beneficial cards and allowing them to win. This happens very much the same way as a noble lord would need to work with and against allies to recruit military units and back the lord with the strongest army and best claim to the throne. The player who wins the combat phase will take control of the Onyx Crown, become the regent, and earn 3 legitimacy points. Any player who backs the regent will earn 1 legitimacy point. While the combat might seem like the most important phase in a game about war, the combat phase simply consists of revealing and resolving cards. The strategy around who gets which card and who earns what points is largely determined in the plotting phase. Military units are the player's primary means of winning combat, but any player who earned the backing of a great house likely had to discard some of their units and are therefore unlikely to win only with the military units that remain in their hand. A player determined to become regent, therefore, will need to gain the support of other players through interpersonal strategies. These can include bluffing, convincing other players that you have a strong army and they should back you in order to earn 1 legitimacy point. Negotiation, if you back me this round, I'll back you the next round, so we both go into the following round with 4 points. Intimidation, if you don't back me, I'll make sure you lose the support of your house in the next influence phase. And bribery, back me and I'll give you an extra portion of the spoils of war. More on spoils and bribery when we get to the regent phase. Starting with the first player, each player shows support by placing up to 1 card face up in front of any player with the support of a great house. This is called the first pass. Next, each player may play up to 2 cards face down in front of any number of players with the support of a great house. A player is considered to be backing the last player that they played a card in front of. A player may play all of their cards in front of themselves, but they do not earn an additional legitimacy point if they win. Cards played in the plotting phase make up the army of the player that they are played in front of. This includes event cards, meaning the effects of the event affect the player who ends up with the card in the combat phase, not the player who played it in the plotting phase. This can be confusing when determining how to play event cards, so keep this distinction in mind. All of the bidding and plotting has led up to this moment. Once all players have played their cards for the plotting phase, the combat round begins. All players shuffle their face-down cards so they don't know which cards others have backed them with, and then reveal their armies simultaneously. Starting with the first player, force is tallied and event cards resolved. Each player determines the order in which event cards in their army are resolved. In addition to the card-specific modifiers discussed in the influence section, armies gain a +1 modifier for each pair of units that match the great house that is supporting them. If an army has no units that match their house, they receive a -4 modifier. At this point, players may realize that they bid too high in the influence phase and no longer have enough or the right military to win. Knowing when and how to play a military card is as key to winning battles as the pure force of the card. So let's tally up these points really quick. The player whose army has the highest force score wins 3 legitimacy points and takes control of the Onyx Crown, becoming the regent and the first player. Any player who backed the regent earn 1 legitimacy point. Mechanically, one player won the round by having the most points. Thematically, one lord is crowned regent by virtue of winning. Beginning with the first player, the current regent, players draw either 2 military cards or 1 event card. Any player who played no cards during the plotting phase may draw 2 military cards and 1 event card. The regent then claims the spoils of war. As discussed in the plotting phase, these spoils are the regent's most powerful bargaining chip. The regent draws 1 military card for every player. The regent must give out 1 of these cards to any player who backed them in the plotting phase. The regent may then distribute any cards in their hands as they see fit to fulfill any promises made in the plotting phase. These promises are not binding, however. The only action required by the regent is to distribute 1 card from the spoils to each player who backed them. And if the regent's army included a betrayal event card indicated by a red dagger icon, then they are not even required to distribute these cards. A regent who goes back on too many promises may have difficulty gaining support in future plotting phases. After cards have been distributed, players discard down to 9 cards, and all discarded cards are shuffled back into their respective decks. The next round begins with the influence phase. Some special rules now apply to the regent. Most of them are beneficial, but some can be detrimental. The regent cannot lose their house card in the influence phase. However, because instability in the realm is not good for those in power, every time a player gains a new house, the regent must discard 1 card from their hand. This is an easy rule to forget, as the regent has no incentive to remember, and other players may be too focused on bidding for influence. But it's important for the balance of the game, otherwise the regent's role becomes overpowered. The regent is the first player in every phase, and they determine the winner in the case of any ties. The regent can also play up to 3 cards face down in the second pass of the plotting phase. A good regent will use these new responsibilities to curry favor from the other players during the plotting phase. The game is over when one player has at least 9 legitimacy points and control of the Onyx Crown. This player is crowned Ruler of Kazath, and the war is over. The endgame of Reign lends itself rather appropriately to king-making among players. King-making is a metagame event that happens in many games when a player concludes, "There's no way I can win, but I can make sure that player X doesn't." Depending on your game group, player X can be the person who won last time, the one who reneged on their promise of spoils, or the tallest player whose opponents can't help but see as a threat regardless of how cleverly and decently they've played. Sorry, I digress. A successful Reign player is one who can find the balance between being ruthless enough to score force points and honorable enough to receive continued support from other players, a strategy that underscores just how perfectly the theme and the mechanics of Reign work together, as rulers of real and fictitious nations likewise need to strike similar balances among their enemies and allies, roles that change quickly. The addicting combination of strategy, bluffing, and negotiation will have you talking about the game long after it's over.